Hello, I want to talk to you about a fable today. A fable is a little story that often uses animals to teach its lesson. The fable that we'll be talking about today is called The Grasshopper and the Ant, and it's from this collection by Jean de La Fontaine. He wrote these during the 18th century, during the 17th century, about 300 or more years ago. So that I don't speak too long during this little podcast, I'll use an hourglass to keep an eye on the time. I'll turn it upside down now. This is an hour. We won't go that long. We'll go about 15 minutes. So we'll try to keep an eye on the sand and the hourglass. French children have now for many hundreds of years learned these fables, these stories. La Fontaine wrote them for adults to teach them a lesson, and he also wrote them for children. He used animals to portray the main characters. We don't have a grasshopper and an ant today. I have some other ideas to portray those two characters, those two animals or insects. They are insects and not animals, aren't they? He wrote these fables and he learned them from the Greek writer Aesop, and his fable is not much different from the one that Aesop wrote, maybe 800 years earlier or more. As I said, he used animals to tell his lessons, to give the moral of the story. That is, to teach children how to act. One of the questions that we'll be addressing is, what does this particular fable about the ant and the grasshopper, or the grasshopper and the ant, tell us? In my classes with college students, I have taught these fables, and when we do it, we act them out. They're not plays, but we treat them as if they were plays. So we will try to do the same thing for this fable. I'll read it aloud in just a bit so that you know what it's about, and we'll talk about how we can divide it up into scenes. In my classes, before we treat the fables, before we act them out, we stand in a circle and we do some what's called warm-ups. We do creativity warm-ups. I do two kinds of exercises frequently, and you're at home right now, and you may not have a lot of brothers and sisters or people around you to do these warm-ups. You may not be able to stand in a circle with other people. If you have to wait till later to when your parents come home, you can do that then. But the first thing we did in our circle, and I would like for you to do it, is we would stand up and we would warm up. We would do a warm-up that is called, for German kids, it's called a creativity warm-up. It consists of doing 2 or 3 movements at the same time. You begin slowly. You begin with your left arm. You raise it up and down. It comes back to your side. You raise it horizontal with your shoulder. You let it back down and it touches your side, and you continue to raise it like that. That's what you do with your left arm. With your right arm, you pat yourself on the head, continuing to raise your left arm up and down. You pat yourself on the head with your right arm. This is the second phase of the warm-up. The third phase is with your right leg, and I won't show this in the video here. With your right leg, you extend it and make a square with your right leg, pointing your foot outwards. So you do a square at the same time as you are raising your arm up and down and patting yourself on the head. If you can do those 3 things at the same time, you will develop some coordination that will help you later in this little dramatization, this little play that we'll do with the cricket, or the grasshopper and the ant. The other kind of warm-up that I did with my students, and I'd like for you to do, is to take an everyday object. Let's take this big soup spoon and use it for something. Normally we would use it to soup out some dip out some soup or something that can be held in a spoon to eat. We would normally use it for that in the kitchen, right? You maybe have one at home. I ask my students to use this spoon for something that it's not meant for. For example, you could think of it as a telephone or a cell phone. You could think of it as a harmonica. You could use it to catch flies or scoop up flies from the wall as a fly swatter, only this would be a fly spoon. You could think of other things to use it for. So one thing to get the creativity going, aside from the physical warm-up, would be then to do a kind of mental warm-up and use this spoon for something that we don't normally use it for. That is surprising. So that's another kind of warm-up. So we've done 2 warm-ups, and we've used some things that we have near to hand, and now we're ready to look at the fable, and I'll read it to you. I'm trying to read it to you slowly so you get the sense of it. It's called, in the translation of La Fontaine that we have here, it's called the Cicada and the Ant, but I'll call the cicada, which is maybe a word that you don't hear a lot, I'll call it the cricket or the grasshopper. Let me use cricket. The cricket, after singing all summer long, found she was very low on provisions when the wintry north wind arrived. Provisions are food and things to eat and drink to get through the winter. Not a single little bit of fly or wormlet, so she didn't have anything to eat. She went crying hunger to the home of her neighbor, the ant, asking her to lend her a few grains to live on until springtime. I'll pay you, she said to her. This is the cricket talking to the ant. I'll pay you, she said to her, before harvest time, on my word as an animal. On my word as an animal. Animals keep their word too. I'll pay you before harvest time, on my word as an animal, both interest and principal. The ant wasn't the lending kind. If she had any fault, it wasn't that one. It wasn't that one. What were you doing during the warm weather? She asked that borrower. Night and day I would sing to all and sundry, if it please you, ma'am. You were singing? I'm very glad to hear it. Well then, now dance. The cicada, I'll read the poem, the fable, one more time through without stopping, so you see what is happening here. That cicada, the cricket, is asking for help because, why? Because she spent all summer singing, and the ant tells her that now is the time to dance. And the ant is being a bit hard on the cricket, a bit cynical. That means unfriendly to her. The ant is a bit bitter because the ant works hard. The cicada, or the cricket, after singing all summer long, found she was very low on provisions when the north wind arrived. Not a single little bit of fly or wormlet. She went crying hunger to the home of her neighbor, the ant, asking her to lend her a few grains to live on until springtime. I'll pay you, she said to her, before harvest time. Oh, my word as an animal, both interest and principal. The ant wasn't the lending kind. If she had any fault, it wasn't that one. What were you doing during the warm weather? She asked that borrower. Night and day I would sing to all and sundry, if it please you, ma'am. You were singing? I'm very glad to hear it. Well then, now dance. So La Fontaine's fable doesn't have a moral added on at the end of the story. Instead, it has the ant speaking for us. Now, I don't have in my office an example of a cricket or a grasshopper or a cicada, and I don't have an ant, but I do have my spoon, and I do have this big fork. And I wonder which one of these do you think would be the ant and which would be the cicada? Which one has an easier life? I think we would agree that the soup spoon has an easier life. All it has to do is ladle up what's already been prepared. On the other hand, the fork, we'll call the fork the ant here, has to do a bit of work, has to turn things, has a harder time of it. Can't just pick up things and because they'll fall through. It has to work hard at keeping things, putting them in the plate or in the skillet. So we have here the cricket or the cicada or the grasshopper, and we have the ant. And they're going to have a conversation. And what would be the main topic of this conversation? It would be the cricket coming to the ant and asking for help. It would be maybe the cricket could even bow to the fork to ask for help and be very gentle. The ant, on the other hand, would turn away, turn its back to the cricket, even though the cricket might follow it, and then turn around and say, "What have you been doing all summer?" And the cricket would answer that it was singing, la 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 la. The ant would then say, "Okay, that's very good. You were singing all summer. Now it's time for you to dance." And maybe the ant could even dance about a little bit, mocking the cricket. The cricket, on the other hand, is not interested in dancing and maybe turns away and leaves. You can find some objects, some things at your house that might serve to impersonate or represent the ant and the cricket. Just keep an eye on the time. How many minutes would you say that is? Maybe 10 minutes of sand hour, of hourglass time. For example, you may find a pencil and a magic marker, and in this case, which of these two would be the cricket and which would be the ant? Which has a harder job? I think it's the magic marker that has the easier job. It's got a thicker tip to it, and it's not hard to mark what it needs to, whereas the pencil needs to be sharpened and you have to be a bit more careful with it. As a dessert for this little talk about the cicada and the ant, I keep saying cicada and I want to say cricket or grasshopper, I want to share with you a word in Chinese for ant. We have in English, of course, and I'll try to write this. We have the word ant, right? I don't write very well with that. We have the word ant. Now, the word in Chinese is, you would say, why are we talking about Chinese all of a sudden? It's because I study Chinese too, and I'd like to talk to you about that wonderful language at one point. But one of the reasons we're talking about Chinese is we're going to have a surprise. In Chinese, there's a character for insect, and it is written this way. Notice when I write the character in Chinese, I have a certain stroke order. So this is the character chong that stands for insect. And the character for ant is going to have this. The character for ant is going to, the word for ant in Chinese is going to have two parts, and it's going to have two characters. This first character is going to have this what is called a radical on its left side, and it's going to have, this is finishing it out. And this particular part of the first part of ant is pronounced ma. Ma. Chinese has tones, that is, it's almost like music, ma. And the second character that forms the expression ant is going to look like this. And it's pronounced E, and it's going to have a pronunciation. It's going to have the same tone. You see that ma, e, ma, e. This is the expression in this entire, these two characters are the word for ant in Chinese, a lot more complicated than in English, no? One of the interesting things about the word ant in Chinese is that it has in it this part of the character, which is, and this is a surprise for me, this is the character for horse, So that when we say the word ant in Chinese, we're saying insect, horse, insect, and then we have this part of this character which stands for justice. It's this part is justice. So what we have, and this is the surprise that I want to give you at the end, and I think you'll find it, and I'm writing justice here, is what we have in Chinese for ant is the concept or is the expression insect, horse, insect, justice. There's something about an ant in Chinese which is hardworking and strong. Who would doubt that? And there's something just in how it acts, and I think we could connect that to La Fontaine's Fable, that what the ant is doing is more sensible and just than what the cricket is doing. So that's an illustration of the wonderful Chinese language and how it says the word ant, ma yi, and how it says it when we write it in Chinese, how we're talking about an insect twice in that one word, and how we're talking about a horse and justice too. There's a lot packed into that expression that we don't find in our word ant. The word for cricket or grasshopper in Chinese is different. It doesn't include the ant, it does include the insect symbol, the insect radical. But if we start looking at that character in Chinese, we'll go down a long path indeed, because the cricket is extraordinarily important in Chinese culture. And there are even cricket competitions and cricket art in Chinese. But that's enough about crickets in Chinese. We started today with a scene from a fable from La Fontaine, the first of his collection for children, written hundreds of years ago, about the necessity, let's not talk about necessity, about the need that we have to work hard during the summer so that during the wintry months, during the cold and harsh winter months, we'll have enough food to get by. How is the hourglass? The hourglass is here. Let's say it's time to stop. Thank you. See you next time.